Let's talk to Godfrey Bloom, who's here with us right now to get his view of what's happening. Godfrey, very good morning to you, sir. Welcome back.
You, Mike.
This is, in some ways, a great day, I'm hoping, because it'll be the end of Keir Starmer's career as Prime Minister, but also a bit of a sad day that we've had to come to this point in our British history, politically, that this guy could have ever got into Downing Street in the first place and could have been so ridiculously kind of misinformed about what the British people want.
Aren't they all, though? One after the other. Some are better at hiding it, Mike, aren't they? I mean, Boris Johnson was full of bonhomie and he was a sort of cheerful sort of character, but he was just as sociopathic as this Prime Minister that we have. He just managed to hide it so well. And of course, his actions belayed that situation when he's, you know, the Boris bulge and all that kind of stuff. The way he stopped the peace deal, in Istanbul that was signed. We're now 1 million Ukrainian dead later, but he's still bumbling along and cheerful chappy, and the press are still falling for it. He's just as bad. This guy, of course, is just appalling. He's just dreadful.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point, but I think he's worse than anyone I've ever seen. You know, yesterday he thought it was a great idea to get up and make a speech which was about as useless a speech as I've ever witnessed, at which the high point was, we're going to carry on delivering the change that people wanted. You know, well, you're not actually, because you can't. Oh, I know, let's nationalise British steel. But let's get rid of the furnaces so we can't make any steel that's worth a fag end. I mean, you know, he's literally like some kind of, you know, idiot savant who can't even, you know, count the matches if he drops the box.
I think we need to just consider, and I've been saying this for some time, that yes, he looks hopeless and he is hopeless and his Chancellor of the Exchequer are hopeless and the whole front bench are hopeless. But if you trace back their history, their political history from their student days, it begs the question, does it not, Mike? Is this not deliberate? They are communists or Trotskyists or whatever they happen to be. Their mission is to destroy this country. Are they as stupid and as inept as we seem to think? Or is this part of a great plan? It's difficult to believe it's not planned. It's almost difficult to believe they can be this bad without some kind of program of events.
I take that point, but I think they actually are. Because, as I said to William Clouston, I was quite shocked back in 2018, 2019, when I spent more time in Westminster than I've ever spent, because I've always been a news journalist. I haven't spent a lot of time messing around with politicians. And I was singularly unimpressed with most of the politicians that came and sat down to talk to me. And I thought, there's nothing going on in your head. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing intelligent. You're kind of automatons. It may be something recent that we now have as a sort of the managerial class of politicians that we've got. But I just thought, these people are not very bright.
That is, of course, Mike, quite true. I don't dispute that for one moment. But I think this particular front bench is very slightly different because I think they're on a mission to destroy the country. I think the previous governments have just been hopelessly incompetent and detached and delusional. This lot, I think, you know, Miliband not drilling for oil, for example, when we're buying it from the Norwegians who drilled an adjacent oil field in the North Sea and gas. It's difficult to believe, is it not, that this isn't some kind of game that they're playing to halt the country, to stop the country, so that they can then propel it into some sort of WEF paradise. I could be wrong, Mike. You could be right. They can just be unbelievably stupid and thick. It's possible too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a new imperative in politics, which is that people in politics now seem to get incredibly wealthy, which they didn't used to. You know, you'd have this kind of people, you'd have a sort of a wide range of people, whether they were trade unionists or whether they were people from the left side of politics who would come in because they wanted to do some good, and people from the right who had already got quite a lot of money, you know, but nobody was getting like the riches that people like Tony Blair now have, and Gordon Brown, we're told, doesn't really have that much money, but you know, they all seem to leave office with a lot more money, like millions of pounds, before that didn't seem to happen. And I wonder if that is something that we should look at.
I think you're right there, and it seems to go unexplored by mainstream media. Nobody actually asks these people And they're all at it to one
Yeah.
degree or another. I mean, Angela Rayner, who can barely string a sentence together or pronounce her vowels,
Right.
is now sort of a multi-millionaire. And we need to wonder about that. How did that happen? Ed Miliband is the same. All these people, I seem to be the only bloody politician who left politics without making any dough out of it. I'm really furious about it.
You're like one of those, you know what, you're like one of those footballers, Godfrey, that left football before the Premier League began and went, you know, I had to go and run a pub. You know, there's a guy over there with 12 Lamborghinis, you know, and you go, why did it all go wrong? But let's go back to your theory as well, because I'm not dismissing it. I'm just interested in what's in it for them. If it's not money, is there something else?
Well, I think if they have a political goal, which is, as I say, a sort of globalist, neo-communist ambition, and they pick up money as they go. They pick up money as they go along. So they're chasing what is, ironically, counterintuitively, a capitalist goal as they try and build a socialist utopia. But then, of course, champagne socialists aren't a new phenomenon, are they?
No.
Sadly. I mean, I blame the press again. When we had those problems with people with their hand in the till in Westminster, I spoke to the Yorkshire Post editor, because my constituency was Yorkshire, and I said, we're not all on the take. You know, there's plenty of not on the take. I didn't take my MEP salary. I haven't taken the MEP pension. The attendance allowances I gave to Yorkshire charities, all documented. And he said, I can't talk about that, Godfrey. He said, I can't talk about that. I can't sell newspapers by saying you're a good guy. And I said, well, you know, how can you slag off all these bad guys if you're not saying, just a minute, it doesn't come up with the ration. There are plenty of people from all parties, incidentally, who don't have their hand in the till.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, unfortunately, now the media, and I'm with you on blaming them for an awful lot of this, are no longer like that. They don't want to look for the bad guys. They want to try and champion the good guys and say that, you know, look at broadcast media now. People like Robert Peston, Beth Rigby, you know, they'd rather get on the Prime Minister's plane than criticise him for being a complete dolt. You know, because that's their way of life, because they think they can write a book, they think they can have a show, they think they can do a podcast. You know, it's all about the sort of the feeding of each other rather than the exploitation of each other, which was much more the case in my day as a reporter. You know, I didn't care who I upset. I didn't care if I didn't get invited to Downing Street. I just wanted to get a decent story. And if somebody was up to no good, I wanted to tell people.
Of course, but at the establishment, the blob, or whatever you want to call them, pay them so handsomely. I mean, look at Laura Cheeseburger and all these other people, Emily Maitlis and all those ghastly people. They're only on hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, but that spigot can be turned off because they're getting it from the public purse. And at the end of the day, it's the politicians in power who could just clip that off if they're not singing the party line. We go right back to Dr. David Bellamy, for example. He was out the door since he tried to expose the climate hoax, which incidentally is still going on, virtually unchallenged by mainstream media.
Well, I'm the only person that's been critical of David Attenborough. You know, as the world celebrates his 100th birthday, I put him on Plank of the Week. You know, because as far as I'm concerned, this is a guy who told a lot of bloody lies about the climate and about what was happening. Right? Of course he is. And he should stop being a grifter at 100.
The guy's rotten to the core, but he's 100 now, and he's a mate of the king, so nobody's allowed to say so. Look, I spent years in the city, 10 years in politics. I know a grifter when I see one.
Very true. And the other thing that's destroyed everything, I think, in the world, certainly in Western Europe, is immigration. And they're all signing up to that bleeding hymn book. I mean, reform, you may have a few misgivings about, but at least they're now selling the idea that immigration is wrong, which nobody has ever said in the last 25 years.
You're absolutely right. I'm not quite sure how deep the commitment goes because it seems to be a little bit blowing in the wind. The whole country is fed up with mass immigration. And they're not leading public opinion, they're following it, which always makes me slightly suspicious. I just like to say one or two words about that as it's come up. And that is the commitment to repatriate all the illegals and the bad guys and the crooks and the criminals and the rapists and all these people that come from abroad and we don't know who they are. Now, we're dealing now with an existential problem, and we're talking with hundreds of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Now, in my very undistinguished military career some time ago, many years ago, decades ago, I was with the Royal Logistic Corps, and I was a movements officer for a time, and with British Army on the Rhine. It takes a lot of expertise to move big numbers of people about.
Yeah.
It really is much more. People think, oh, just chuck them on a plane. It isn't like that. Incidentally, I'm in favour of mass repatriation, but it's got to be done right.
Yeah.
You have to make sure these people. We're talking about aeroplanes. No, these numbers have to go on boats.
Yeah.
We have to commandeer, requisition some boats, big liners, and
Yeah.
we have to fill them up and send them away. They have to be watered and fed en route. Also, we have a totally hostile civil service, which is largely manned by immigrants.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. We have a very woke police force. We have a tiny army now, which is probably only about 20% of the number of immigrants that we want to repatriate. It's tiny. And the officer corps has been woked up a little bit, in my view, but that's an old man speaking. But we've got to think out who's going to actually do it when push comes to shove, getting rid of hundreds of thousands of fit young men living in hotels. Who's going to shift them?
Right. Well, I had a plan for this two or 3 years ago when I said that what we should be doing with the people coming across the channel in small boats is stopping them in the middle of the channel, recommissioning some kind of old liner of some kind, as you say, and take them off the boat so they don't come to the shores of Britain, so they can't claim asylum. You put them on a boat which is effectively in international waters, and you can easily contain them on there. You can probably get a few thousand people on it, and then when it's full, sail it off somewhere like the Ascension Islands or somewhere like that, and put them in some kind of holding camp there. And if they want to apply for asylum, they can, but they won't probably get success, and they'll all give up because they won't fancy that trip at all. But you might remember as well, the RAF were told at one point by some politician or other that we should fly them all to Ascension Island, and the RAF said we won't do it because it's inhumane.
I rest my case about wokery in the senior command, but bear in mind, I've said this many times, Mike, and it's only because of my rather undistinguished military background I understand these things. You cannot get promoted above half colonel, which is wing commander in the Air Force, etc. You cannot get promoted to high levels unless you are politically correct and politically acceptable. And you've only got to look at some of these senior admirals, senior airmen being interviewed on TV. They are woke. They've all been spoilt at university, very often Mickey Mouse universities, and they are woke. And they're not the leaders of old. They're not the sort of Douglas Barders in the Air Force these days.
No.
These people are part of the problem. And how you can turn around and say we won't do it, by God, if I were the Prime Minister, they'd be down the road in no time without their bloody pension and stripped of their bloody buttons.
Court-martialed. And, sorry, you don't get to disagree with the government and their orders. You do what you're told.
Exactly. And they don't resign. Why do they not? They never resign. You never hear of a senior officer in the armed forces resigning on a point of principle. And why? It's down to money. There's a huge difference between being a major general, a lieutenant general, or in their pension fund. It's thousands and thousands of pounds of index-linked money. So they've really got to give something up if they're going to say, just a minute, no, I didn't join the forces for this. They do at junior level, mid-rank, middle management. They do in disgust, and we have seen one of that lady, aircraft Royal Air Force lady. She said, no, I will not discriminate against white young men from working class backgrounds. I'm going to recruit on meritocracy, but she had to go. The whole thing's broken. The civil service is broken. The armed forces is broken. The police is a disgusting organisation these days, much to the chagrin of junior policemen who are also leaving. Good ones are leaving in droves. And this is something, only Rupert Lowe is really talking about this in depth. And we've got 2 or 3 years. We may have 2 or 3 years. It may come sooner. But we've got to have some kind of document that says this is, as Winston Churchill would say, action this day. This is what we must have. Because if we're going to get elected, we're going to do this, this, and this. And you can't muck about. And all this business about we've got to get rid of the European Court of Human Rights and we've got to do this. But the days of doing all this through a parliamentary system are long gone. Long gone.
Indeed, absolutely right. We've got a little poll going today, Godfrey, because we've got to move on, but I just want to run it past you. The 4 most welcome departures in British history. 1, the Romans leaving Britain in 410 AD, the Black Death finishing in 1380, the Spanish Armada sailing off in 1588, and Keir Starmer stepping down. He's currently leading all of those other things with 93% of the vote.
Well, that just shows you can always win something no matter who you are.
Absolutely right. Brilliant to see you, as ever. Have a lovely day. Thank you very much indeed. Godfrey Bloom, they're making a perfect bowl of sense and mixing it all around and talking about it. I mean, I'm not sure whether you agree with him. You may do. There is a problem with the government of this day, and the problem with all governments is that they're all kind of doing it for the wrong reasons, and we don't know what those reasons are, and how could they possibly be thinking that ruining the country is the right thing to do?
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.